Hello and welcome to my channel. Today is Friday and that means it's time for Deadly Days. This is a bit of a long one, so bear with me. And it gets graphic and it gets bad and it gets shitty. So there's your content warning. But other than that, let's get into it because like I said, this is a long one and it's going to be a little bit. The San Ysidro McDonald's Massacre was an act of mass murder which occurred at a McDonald's restaurant in the San Ysidro neighborhood of San Diego, California on July 18, 1984. The perpetrator, 41-year-old James Huberty, fatally shot 22 people, including an unborn baby, and wounded 19 others before being killed by a police sniper approximately 77 minutes after he first opened fire. At the time, the massacre was the deadliest mass shooting by a lone gunman in U.S. history, being surpassed 7 years later by the Louis shooting. It remains the deadliest mass shooting in California. On July 15, 1984, James Huberty commented to his wife Etna that he suspected he had a mental health problem. I mean, at least he admitted it. 2 days later, on the morning of July 17th, he called a San Diego mental health clinic requesting an appointment. Leaving his contact details with the receptionist, Huberty was assured the clinic would return his call within hours. According to his wife, Huberty sat quietly beside the telephone for several hours, awaiting the return call before abruptly walking out of the family home and riding to an unknown destination on his motorcycle. Unbeknownst to Huberty, the receptionist had misspelled his name as Schuberty. His polite demeanor conveyed no sense of urgency to the operator, and he had elaborated in the phone call that he had never been hospitalized for mental health issues. Therefore, the call had been logged as a non-crisis inquiry to be handled within 48 hours. And not to be an ass, but I'm pretty sure they probably regretted that decision of not responding as a crisis. But I as somebody with mental health issues, I get it. If we don't sound like we're, on the verge of hurting ourselves or someone else, then oftentimes we are shuffled to the back of the list. And that is unfortunate because he could have used help. And there's no guarantee, sorry, let me fix the camera a little bit. There's no guarantee that this would have fixed the issues that he had, but it was worth a shot. I'm going to fix this light because it's bugging me. Hold on. Okay, that's better. Approximately 1 hour later, Huberty returned home in a contented mood. After eating dinner, Huberty, his wife, and their two daughters, Zelia, 12, and Cassandra, 10, cycled to a nearby park. Later that evening, he and Etna watched a movie together on their television. The following morning, Wednesday, July 18th, Huberty, his wife, and children visited the San Diego Zoo. In the course of their walk through the zoo, Huberty told his wife of his belief that his life was effectively over. Referring to the mental health clinic's failure to return his phone call the previous day, he said, well, society had their chance. After eating lunch at a McDonald's restaurant in the Claremont neighborhood of San Diego, the Huberty family returned home. Holding a gun across his shoulder and carrying a box of ammunition and a bundle wrapped in a checkered blanket, Huberty glanced towards Zelia as he walked toward the front door of their apartment and said, goodbye, I won't be back. Huberty then drove down San Ysidro Boulevard. According to eyewitnesses, he drove first toward a Big Bear supermarket and then toward a post office before entering the parking lot of a McDonald's restaurant approximately 200 yards away from his Averill Road apartment. And I have this feeling that if he'd gone into the Big Bear supermarket or the post office, it would have been the same as the McDonald's. It would have been a massacre and it would have been a mass shooting. But it could have been so much more than that because supermarkets can hold a lot more people than a McDonald's can, you know what I mean? It's sad, but it could have been even more bad, if that makes sense. At approximately 3:56 p.m. on July 18th, Huberty drove his black Mercury Marquis sedan into the parking lot of the McDonald's restaurant on San Ysidro Boulevard. In his possession were a 9mm Browning HP semi-automatic pistol, a 9mm Uzi carbine, a Winchester 1200 12-gauge pump-action shotgun, and a box and a cloth bag filled with hundreds of rounds of ammunition for each weapon. A total of 45 customers were present inside the restaurant. Entering the restaurant minutes later, Huberty first aimed a shotgun at a 16-year-old employee named John Arnold from a distance of about 15 feet. As he did so, the assistant manager, Guillermo Flores, shouted, quote, "Hey John, that guy's going to shoot you," end quote. According to Arnold, when Huberty pulled the trigger, nothing happened. As Huberty inspected his gun, the manager of the restaurant, 22-year-old Neva Kane, walked toward the service counter of the restaurant in the direction of Arnold, as Arnold, believing the incident to be a distasteful joke, began to walk away from the gunman. Huberty fired his shotgun toward the ceiling before aiming the Uzi at Kane, shooting her once beneath her left eye. Kane died minutes later. Immediately after shooting Kane, Huberty fired his shotgun at Arnold, wounding the teenager in the chest and arm before shouting a comment to the effect of, "Everyone on the ground." So, like he would if he was robbing a bank. Huberty then referred to all present in the restaurant as, quote, "dirty swine, Vietnam assholes," end quote, before claiming that he had killed 1,000 and that he intended to kill 1,000 more. Upon hearing Huberty's profane rant and seeing Kane and Arnold shot, one customer, 25-year-old Rivera, tried to persuade Huberty not to shoot anyone else. In response, Huberty shot Rivera 14 times, repeatedly shouting, "Shut up," as Rivera screamed in pain. Which, I mean, fair. I would scream too. As staff and customers tried to hide beneath tables and service booths, which honestly is not really much protection, and that is sad that, like, these places, they don't really have anywhere to go. Maybe if you're lucky you can get into a bathroom, but, like, basically being under, it's the same for having students sit under desks. They're basically sitting ducks, and that's devastating. But we will talk about the students being told to sit under desks in next week's segment, because we're going to do the Uvalde school shooting. Yeah. As staff and customers tried to hide beneath tables and service booths, Huberty turned his attention towards 6 women and children huddled together. Children. He first killed 19-year-old Maria Colominero Silva with a single gunshot to the chest, then fatally shot 9-year-old Claudia Perez in the stomach, cheek, thigh, hip, leg, chest, back, armpit, and head with his Uzi. He then wounded Perez's 15-year-old sister Imelda once in the hand with the same weapon and fired upon 11-year-old Aurora Pina with his shotgun. Pina, initially wounded in the leg, had been shielded by her pregnant aunt, 18-year-old Jackie Reyes. Huberty shot Reyes 48 times with the Uzi, so she was dead. It's clear that she was dead, and that is just so... okay. Sorry. It gets worse. So, if you don't want to hear about anything more about children, I would suggest skipping this video. Beside his mother's body, 8-month-old Carlos Reyes sat up and wailed, whereupon Huberty shouted at the baby, then killed him with a single pistol shot to the center of the back. Huberty then shot and killed a 62-year-old trucker named Lawrence Verslewis. I'm so sorry, this is probably wrong. Before targeting a family seated near the play area of the restaurant who had tried to shield their son and his friend beneath the table with their bodies. 31-year-old Blythe Reagan Herrera had shielded her 11-year-old son Mateo beneath the one booth as her husband Ronald protected Mateo's friend, 12-year-old Keith Thomas, beneath the booth directly across from them. Ronald Herrera urged Thomas not to move, shielding the boy with his body. Thomas was shot in the shoulder, arm, wrist, and left elbow, but was not seriously wounded. Ronald Herrera was shot 6 times in the stomach, chest, arm, hip, shoulder, and head, but survived. His wife, Blythe, and son Mateo were both killed by numerous gunshots to the head. Nearby, 3 women had also attempted to hide beneath the booth. 24-year-old Guadalupe Del Rio lay against a wall. She was shielded by her friends, 25-year-old Gloria Ramirez and 31-year-old, and I'm so sorry if this is wrong, it probably is, and I always feel bad because I don't know how to say this, Arisdelcy Vuelavas Vargas. Del Rio was hit several times but was not seriously wounded. Ramirez was unhurt, whereas Vargas received a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. She died of her wound the next day, the only person fatally wounded who lived long enough to reach a hospital. At another booth, Huberty killed 45-year-old banker Hugo Velasquez with a single shot to the chest. The first of many calls to emergency services was made shortly after 4 p.m., notifying police of the shooting of a child who had been taken to a post office on San Ysidro Boulevard. The dispatcher mistakenly directed responding officers to another McDonald's 2 miles from the San Ysidro Boulevard restaurant. This error delayed the imposition of a lockdown by several minutes, and only warnings to civilians near the restaurant were given by passerby. Shortly after 4 p.m., a young woman named Lydia Flores drove into the parking lot, stopping at the food pickup window. Flores noticed shattered windows and the sound of gunfire before looking up, and there he was, just shooting. Flores reversed her car until she crashed into a fence. She hid in some bushes with her 2-year-old daughter Melissa until the shooting ended. At approximately 4:05 p.m., a Mexican couple, Astolfo and Marciela Felix, drove toward one of the service areas of the restaurant. Noting the shattered glass, Astolfo initially assumed renovation work was in progress and that Huberty, striding toward the car, was a repairman. Huberty fired a shotgun and Uzi at the couple and their 4-month-old daughter Carlita, striking Marciela in the face, arms, and chest, blinding her in one eye and permanently rendering one hand unusable. Carlita was critically wounded in the neck, chest, and abdomen. Astolfo was wounded in the chest and head. As Astolfo and Marciela staggered away from Huberty's line of fire, Marciela gave their baby to her husband. Astolfo handed the shrieking child to a young woman named Lucia Velasco as his wife collapsed against a car. Velasco rushed the baby to a nearby hospital as her husband assisted Astolfo and Marciela into a nearby building. All 3 members of the Felix family survived. Honestly, the fact that that 4-month-old baby came through despite a gunshot wound to her neck is pretty freaking amazing. Because that she probably shouldn't have survived that. So I always love it when they come through, and that was a miracle. I'll give them that one. 3 11-year-old boys then rode their BMX bikes into the west parking lot. Hearing a member of the public yell something unintelligible from across the street, all 3 hesitated before Huberty shot the 3 boys with his shotgun and Uzi. Joshua Coleman fell to the ground, critically wounded in the back, arm, and leg. He later recalled looking toward his 2 friends, Omar Alonso Hernandez and David Flores Delgado. Noting that Hernandez was on the ground with multiple gunshot wounds to his back and head, had started vomiting. Delgado had received several gunshots to his head. Coleman survived. Hernandez and Delgado both died at the scene. Huberty next noticed an elderly couple, 74-year-old Miguel Victoria Uola and 69-year-old Ada Velasquez Victoria, walking toward the entrance. As Miguel reached to open the door for his wife, Huberty fired his shotgun, killing Ada with a gunshot to the face and wounding Miguel, cradling his wife in his arms and wiping blood from her face. Shouting curses at Huberty, who then approached the doorway, swore at Miguel, then killed him with a shot to the head. It's sad. I've got elderly parents myself. My mom is almost 80. My dad is past 80. And it's like you've lived that long and nothing major or really serious has ever happened to you. And then one day at 74, somebody just takes you out with a gun. I am kind of grateful though that they went together. They went at the same time, because I can only imagine how difficult it would have been to not only live with the trauma of having somebody shoot at you, but also losing your significant other forever at the hands of somebody else and having to live with that memory. Nobody should have died, and I will always stand by that. This could have been avoided. This could have been handled. He could have done a million other things than what he did. But in this case, I am grateful that they went together, because, like I said, it's so hard. It's very hard, and I don't think at their age they would have been able to handle that. So probably better that they went together, although I wish nobody had died. But unfortunately, I'd be out of a job if they hadn't, sadly. Approximately 110 minutes after the first call had been placed to emergency services, police arrived at the correct McDonald's restaurant. 110 minutes, and this was all because you gave the wrong address. But it was 2 miles. Why did it take you so freaking long to get from restaurant 1 to restaurant 2 when they're only 2 miles apart? This is where I come in questioning, because, like, what do you mean it took you that long to get there? The first officer on the scene, Miguel Rosario, rapidly determined the location and cause of the actual disturbance and relayed this information to the San Diego Police Department as Huberty fired at Rosario's patrol car. Officers deployed immediately and imposed a lockdown on an area spanning 6 blocks from the site of the shootings. The police established a command post 2 blocks from the restaurant and deployed 175 officers in numerous strategic locations. These officers were joined within the hour by several SWAT team members who also took positions around the restaurant. As Huberty was firing rapidly and alternating between firearms, police initially were unaware how many individuals were inside the restaurant. Furthermore, because most of the restaurant's windows had been shattered by gunfire, because, that happens, reflections from the shards of glass provided an additional difficulty for police focusing inside the restaurant. Which I can understand that, because, if you got broken glass and they're, reflecting off the light, or they're reflecting off other people, or whatever the case may be, it can be very difficult to, gauge how many people are in there and who's good, who's bad. You don't know, because you don't know who the shooter is this time. You don't know if there's more than one. You don't know if the employees are involved. You don't know who's hurt. It's just, it becomes a mess, and it's always better to be safe rather than sorry. So in this situation, I kind of understand their hesitation, but again, we'll be into the Uvalde school shooting next week, and I have some questions for those officers. Thank you. As Huberty was firing rapidly and alternating... Oh, I already read that. This is why I have a script, because I have short-term memory loss. Sorry. Initially, police were concerned the gunman or gunmen might be holding hostages, although one individual who had escaped from the restaurant informed police there was a single gunman present on the premises, holding no hostages and shooting any individual he encountered. At 5:05 p.m., all responding law enforcement personnel were authorized to kill the perp should they obtain a clear shot. I was thinking about this, and you want to know who this guy, when I first researched this case, who this guy made me think of, and y'all may not know, but I've done a segment on him. I have done a segment on him. I will look for it, and I will link it in the comment box below. But John List, that's who this guy makes me think of. Everything's fine, he's doing great, he's got a job, then you find out he doesn't have a job, he was fired or let go or whatever, and he's been pretending to go to work, but now the money's run out, and he just decides that he's going to obliterate his entire family, except in this case it was people he didn't know. But that's who that makes me think of. You went to the zoo the day of, and you went to have lunch at a different McDonald's than the one you obviously came and shot at people at. But dude, you had a perfectly normal, everyday situation, and then you just decided to go shoot a bunch of people for no reason. So it's just the scenario of how it lines up makes me think of John List. Yeah, he was a real winner. Several survivors later reported observing Huberty walking towards the service counter and adjust a portable radio, possibly to search for news reports of his shooting spree, before selecting a music station and further shooting individuals as he danced to the music. Now, that does not sound like a psychotic break. I don't know what does. Shortly thereafter, Huberty searched the kitchen area, discovering 6 employees and shouting, quote, "Oh, there's more. You're trying to hide from me, you bastards," end quote. In response, one of the female employees screamed in Spanish, "Don't kill me, don't kill me," before Huberty opened fire, killing 21-year-old Paulina Lopez, 19-year-old Elsa Barbaro Fierro, and 18-year-old Margarita Padilla, and critically wounding 17-year-old Albert Leos. Immediately before Huberty began shooting, Padilla grabbed the hand of her friend and colleague, 17-year-old Wendy Flanagan, before the two began to run. Padilla was then fatally shot. Flanagan, 4 other employees, and a female customer or infant hid inside a basement utility room. They were later joined by Leos, who had crawled to the utility room after being shot 5 times. When a fire truck drove within range, Huberty opened fire and repeatedly pierced the vehicle with bullets, slightly wounding one occupant. Hearing a wounded teenager, 19-year-old Jose Perez, moaning, Huberty shot him in the head. The youth slumped dead beside the booth he had been seated at. Perez died alongside his friend and neighbor, 22-year-old Gloria Gonzalez, and a young woman named Michelle Carncross. At one point, Aurora Pena, who had lain wounded beside her dead aunt, baby cousin, and two friends, noted a lull in firing. Opening her eyes, she saw Huberty nearby, staring in her direction. He swore and threw a bag of french fries at Pena, then retrieved his shotgun and shot the child in the arm, neck, and jaw. Aurora Pena survived, although she would remain hospitalized longer than any other survivor. At 5:17 p.m., Huberty walked from the service counter toward the doorway close to the drive-in window of the restaurant, affording a 27-year-old police SWAT sniper named Charles Foster, deployed to a strategic position on the roof of a post office directly opposite the restaurant, an unobstructed view of his body from the neck down through the telescopic sight of his .38 caliber rifle. Foster fired a single round from a range of approximately 35 yards. The bullet entered Huberty's chest, severed his aorta just beneath his heart, and exited through his spine, leaving a 1 square inch exit wound, and sending Huberty sprawling backwards onto the floor, directly in front of the service counter, killing him almost instantly. Immediately after shooting Huberty, Foster relayed to other responding officers he had killed the perp and that his focus remained on the motionless suspect. Nonetheless, as so many rounds had been expended from different firearms within the restaurant, police were not completely certain the sole perp was deceased. Entering the restaurant approximately 1 minute later, a police sergeant focused his gun upon Huberty as he noted the movements of a wounded girl. When asked if the deceased male was the suspect, the girl nodded her head. Although Huberty was evidently deceased, as a precaution, an officer turned his body face down and handcuffed his wrists behind his back, which I mean is totally fair because I have seen movies and true crime and a lot of things in which they looked at it and the next thing you know they suddenly sit up and they're like, like if you ever seen Resident Evil, the last one, well actually it was the one before the last, the one before the last one, the German N-word zombies, because YouTube will flag me for saying that word. At the end, that guy was shot 18 times, but then he sat up and he shot the one guy, and then he who's dead, obviously. Yeah. So this shit can happen. I mean, it can happen. So the entire incident had lasted for 77 minutes, during which time Huberty fired a minimum of 257 rounds of ammunition, killing 20 people and wounding as many others, one of whom was pronounced brain dead upon arrival at the hospital and died the following day. 17 of the victims were killed inside the restaurant and 4 in the immediate vicinity. Only 10 individuals inside the restaurant were uninjured, 6 of whom had hidden inside the basement utility rooms. Several victims had tried to staunch their own wounds and or the wounds of their companions with napkins, often in vain. Of the fatalities, 13 died from gunshot wounds to the head, 7 from gunshots to the chest, and one victim, 8-month-old Carlos Reyes, from a single 9mm gunshot to the back. The victims, whose ages ranged from 4 months to 74 years, were predominantly, though not exclusively, of Mexican or Mexican-American ancestry, reflecting local demographics. Prior to shooting several of his victims, Huberty had shouted accusations or insults. On one occasion, he also shouted that he himself did not deserve to live, but that he was taking care of this matter. Although Huberty had repeatedly shouted throughout his shooting spree that he had been a veteran of the Vietnam War, he had never actually served in any military branch. Initial reports issued by the San Diego Police Department following the massacre indicated that everyone injured or killed within the restaurant had been shot by Huberty in the initial minutes after he first entered the restaurant. This claim was hotly disputed by survivors who stated Huberty had shot both wounded and unwounded people over 40 minutes after he first opened fire. James Oliver Huberty was born in Canton, Ohio, the second of 2 children born to Earl Vincent, a quality inspector, and Islay Evelyn Huberty, a homemaker. Both parents were devoutly religious, and the family were regular attendees at local United Methodist churches. When Huberty was 3 years old, he contracted polio. To minimize the debility of his ailment, he was required to wear steel and leather braces upon both legs. Although Huberty made a progressive recovery from this ailment, he would be afflicted with a mild limp for the remainder of his life. In 1950, Earl Huberty purchased a 155-acre farm in Mount Eaton. Ickley refused to live in a rural location and refused to even view the property. Shortly thereafter, Ickley abandoned her family to perform sidewalk preaching as a Pentecostal missionary in Tucson, Arizona. Huberty found his mother's abandonment emotionally devastating. His father would later recollect finding his son slumped against the family chicken coop crying. Huberty was a sullen child with few friends, whose primary interest was target practice. Of course it is. A family acquaintance will later describe him as a queer little boy who practiced incessantly with a target pistol. By his teens, Huberty was something of an amateur gunsmith. Due to his limp, his family's extreme religious beliefs, and his reluctance to socialize with his peers, Huberty was frequently targeted by bullies at Waynedale High School. An average scholar, he graduated 51st out of a class of 77 students in 1960. In 1962, Huberty enrolled at Malone College, where he initially studied sociology before opting to study at the Pittsburgh Institute of Mortuary Science. He graduated with honors from this institute in 1964, being issued with a funeral director's license and the following year an embalmer's license. Huberty had a history of domestic violence, frequently slapping or punching his daughters, holding knives to their throats, or beating his wife. On one occasion, Edna filed a report with the Canton Department of Children and Family Services, stating that her husband had messed up her jaw. Although she later insisted on the majority of occasions he had assaulted her, he struck her only once. That is sad, and it does sound like battered wife syndrome. It's exactly what it is. It's, oh, it just happened once, and he said never do it again, and they'll do it again, and she's honestly lucky she escaped from that marriage alive. Had he not shot all these people, though, she might not have. Beginning in 1975, Edna repeatedly attempted to persuade her husband to seek counseling to alleviate his sources of stress, although he refused to seek any form of therapy. In personal efforts to pacify her husband's temper, anxiety, and general paranoia, and to both influence and control his behavior, Edna took great efforts to minimize any possibility of agitating her husband. She also gradually developed a mechanism whereby she claimed to be able to read his future by reading playing or tarot cards. Huberty believed her. Edna's readings would produce a temporary calming effect, and Huberty would typically follow the recommendations his wife made in these readings. To his neighbors and co-workers, Huberty was perceived as a sullen, ill-tempered, and somewhat paranoid individual, obsessed with firearms and who harbored a mental tally of every setback, insult, or general source of frustration, real or perceived, against himself or his family within his mind. Occasionally, Huberty would retaliate in response to any real or perceived injustice in an effort to settle what he termed my debts, and conflicts with his neighbors would once lead to his detainment on charges of disorderly conduct. On one occasion, he is known to have informed the father of two girls whom he had encouraged his daughters to fight in response to a conflict between the children, quote, "I believe in paying my debts, both good and bad," end quote. A conspiracy theorist and self-proclaimed survivalist, Huberty believed that a breakdown of society was fast approaching, perhaps through economic collapse or nuclear war. He committed himself to prepare to survive this perceived collapse and provisioned his house with ample reserve supplies of non-perishable food and numerous guns, some purchased from co-workers that he intended to use to defend his home during what he believed was the coming apocalypse. You know, a lot of people think that can't. Please refer to the Great Rapture of 2025 for reference. According to a family acquaintance named Jim Aslanes, Huberty's home was bedecked with loaded firearms to such a degree that wherever Huberty was sitting or standing within his home, he could just reach over and get a gun. Each firearm was loaded with the safety catch disabled. Because why would we think about safety when we have 2 small children in the house? Why would we do that? We don't do that. We don't do that. The day after the massacre, reporters visited James Huberty's father in Mount Eaton, Ohio, to garner further information about his son. Having discussed his son's childhood and the family religious background, Earl Huberty pointed to a painting of a lost sheep by the Jordan River before beginning to weep, informing reporters, quote, "Yesterday was the worst day of my life. I feel so sorry for these people," end quote. McDonald's temporarily suspended all television and radio advertisements in the days following the massacre, and in an act of solidarity, our rival fast food chain Burger King also temporarily suspended all forms of advertising. Huberty's body was cremated on July 23, 1984. No official religious service was observed throughout this act. His ashes were returned to his widow and later interred in his home state of Ohio. Why is it always Ohio? Why do they always got to come from Ohio? I live in Ohio, in case you didn't know. In the weeks following the massacre, Huberty's wife and daughters received numerous death threats, forcing them to temporarily reside with a family friend, which I understand why people were angry, but the wife and the children had nothing to do with that, and there's no way she could have known. It's not like he came out and said, well, they were working around the zoo, I'm going to go to McDonald's later and shoot a bunch of people. He didn't even, plan this out. He just chose McDonald's. He went to several other places before McDonald's. So I understand the anger and I understand the frustration, and that's all well and good, but it is sad because his wife and children had nothing to do with it. They were as much a victim as anybody else. All 3 would attend counseling sessions for over 9 months, and honestly probably should have continued them long after that, but apparently 9 months was enough. Edna Huberty and her daughters initially relocated from San Ysidro to Chula Vista, where Azalea and Cassandra enrolled in school under assumed names. 1 year later, the family moved to the community of Spring Valley and San Diego County. Because of the sheer number of victims, local funeral homes had to use the San Ysidro Civic Center to hold wakes for each victim. The local parish, Mount Carmel Church, was forced to hold back-to-back funeral masses in order that each of the dead could be buried in a timely manner. Several police officers who responded to the scene of the massacre suffered symptoms including sleep withdrawal, loss of memory, and guilt in the months following the incident. A study commissioned by the National Institute of Mental Health and conducted by the chief psychologist of the San Diego Police Department in 1985 concluded several officers suffered post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the incident, and I don't blame them. The massacre prompted the city of San Diego to assess the tactical methods by which they responded to incidents of this nature and the firearms in the possession of responding officers. The police department increased training for special units and purchased more powerful firearms in order to better equip law enforcement to respond to scenarios of this magnitude. According to one officer who confessed to having felt inadequate because he had been equipped with a .38 caliber revolver on the day of the massacre, quote, "The time had come where you had to have a full-time, committed, and dedicated, highly trained, well-equipped team able to respond rapidly anywhere in the city," end quote. On August 2nd, San Diego Police Chief William Colander held a press conference to disclose the results of the San Diego Police Department's inquiry into the response to the massacre and the fact an estimated 73 minutes had elapsed between the time the first police officer arrived at the restaurant and Huberty's death. The results of this internal inquiry found that although the arrival of SWAT team members was delayed by rush hour traffic, the police acted appropriately in their method of response. Colander stated any suggestion police should have stormed the restaurant was ludicrous, adding that officers had been unable to obtain a clear view of the gunman because windows had been spiderwebbed by bullet holes, making visibility in direct sunlight difficult. He also emphasized the 8-minute delay between the passing of instruction authorizing all law enforcement personnel to kill Huberty and his death made no difference to the final death toll. Colander finished his report by stating, quote, "I believe the operation was handled the way it should have been handled," end quote. When questioned in regards to the actual motive behind Huberty's murder spree, Colander dismissed any notion of a racial motive behind the massacre, informing reporters, quote, "He just didn't like anybody," end quote. And that's a very sad story of the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre. I told you guys it was long, and so if you made it this far, good for you. But yeah, it's a sad story. These things happen. every day. But as always, don't do anything I wouldn't do. Make good choices, and I'll see y'all next week. Bye.